How do we best prepare for the Mass? There are many different kinds of ways to prepare for the Mass. Reading the text beforehand, reading the readings of the Mass beforehand, striving to think about what am I going to pray for when I get to Mass? What's my specific intention? Many of you know that every Mass is celebrated for a particular intention. The priest, when he approaches the altar, has something within his heart that he is praying for. Well, the people of God can also have intentions and prayer intentions. But I would like to offer, following Joseph's concern for Mary, he is concerned about her reputation, he is concerned about her good name, that one very important manner of preparing for the Mass is through love of neighbor before we get here. It's by caring for one another before we enter into the sanctuary. The sacred liturgy, the Mass, is not me and Jesus. It's not a time when we come to the Lord and it's just me and Him. No, certainly it is you and Him, but it is you and Him participating in the salvation of the world, which involves communion with the world, love of neighbor. I've spoken about this many times before, and many of my brother clergy have spoken about it too. It is a terrible countersign to the meaning of the Mass. If after the Mass, out in the parking lot, you are cursing out your neighbor because they're walking in front of the car too slow, okay? That does not work. There's a deep disconnect there. You haven't got it yet. So too, as you are speeding to Mass, trying to get to Mass before the doors are locked, maybe trying desperately to get to church, and people in front of you are driving super, super slow, and you find that word bubbling up within you, you have to fight against that. That's a counter sign to what the Mass is. We think here of the rich man in the gospel, that terrible, dreadful parable given by Jesus, the rich man who dines sumptuously, and every evening as he comes home from work counting his bills, he has to step over Lazarus, the poor man. He's completely devoid of an understanding of the meaning of his life and why he is wealthy to help others. He just doesn't get it. We are like that. We are like that when we come to Mass, completely devoid of compassion and love for our neighbor out there. Now, this is not the same thing as frustrations, irritations. You know, being behind somebody who's driving really slow can be aggravating. And at times, that is a physiological response that we have minimal control over. But what we can control is what we say. What we can control is how we treat that driver. I think I'm thinking about that because it happened to me yesterday. So, again, our concern for our neighbor, how we treat our neighbor, is an incredibly important part of preparing for the Mass. Preparing for the Mass. Joseph, again, has tremendous concern for our Mama Mary. You can imagine the questions that he had within his heart, the disappointment, the sorrow. Now, there are many different pious writers who have different perspectives and different speculations about what was happening in Joseph's virginal heart. Some writers even go so far as to say Joseph would never assume the worst of Mary. Well, I don't think that he assumes the worst, but facts are facts. And the Blessed Mother is with child. And I don't think that it's any betrayal of a memory of Joseph to think that his heart would have been profoundly hurt. And yet he doesn't act in rage. He doesn't lash out. He doesn't say, bring this to the temple so that everyone may know. No, he wants to separate himself from her quietly. He is concerned for her reputation, for her good name. He doesn't act out of vengeance. And so I think it's important, one way that we can continue to grow in our concern for our neighbor as a manner of preparing for the Mass, is to think to ourselves, how will this affect other people? How will my words affect other people? How will my silence affect them? How will my actions affect them? Not just how it makes me feel, not just in a very real sense, is this the right thing to do or not? We get it. Don't misunderstand me. But how we say things, how we approach certain topics, how we challenge our neighbor in their sin, how we do it matters profoundly. It's not enough just to be right. We have to love. We have to love. How will this affect others? It's a lesson that parents try to teach kids. Before you act, little Sally, how will this affect others? Did you really need to say that? Did you really have to say that? Did you really have to do that when you knew how important this other thing was to your sibling? How will this affect others? A simple but very important question. And it's not always easy to tell the answer. How will this affect the other? But it needs to be a part of our constant discernment of action. How will this speech, this action affect others? In my own role as pastor, it's very important to remember that. And I ask you for your prayers as we strive to remember that. My actions and my life is no longer my own. How I live my life, how I speak, what I do as a pastor and as a public person matters. I don't like it all the time, but it matters. How will my actions affect others? Will it make it easier for them to be good or less easy? It's one of the traditional evaluations of good law by Catholic social teaching. Will this help people be better? Will this make it easier, rather, for people to be better? How will this affect others? Another question that is on Joseph's mind, we preached about this last night, is Joseph is concerned about the rights of others. Again, Mary has a right to a good name. And Joseph is aware of that. He's not only aware of his own right, the right of her fidelity. He's first of all concerned about her rights and his duty towards her and his duty that flow from those rights. How often we are concerned about our own rights being trampled upon. This person is not as kind to me as they ought to be. This person doesn't tend to me as they ought to tend to me. We are so wrapped up in our own rights, and many of them are good. They are good and true. We do have a right to other people's presence and kindness. We do have a right, I think, to expect our family's support. I think we have that right. I think that's what family means. But long before we consider what others owe us, we need to think what I owe them. Again, as pastor, my primary consideration must not be what must the faithful be doing for Transfiguration? What more can they give? And you have given so much. It's got to be more than, gosh, why aren't they doing this or doing that? Wah, wah, wah. But what am I not doing? How am I not fulfilling their needs? How am I not present to them? How am I not praying for them? How am I not suffering for them? This has to be about our own obligations and the rights of others, Those of you who are parents, you have duties to your family, and your children and your spouse has a right to your presence and your support, even when they're smelly and unpleasant. Rights and duties, first of all, other people's rights. When we find ourselves devolving into, why aren't I getting what I want or what I need? Sometimes what I think I need. We have to fight against that. And instead we have to say, what does this other person need from me? Greater compassion, greater love, probably more patience. What did they have a right to from me? And the third manner of preparing for the Mass by our interactions with each other is the rights and the dignity and the preferential love we owe to the poor. St. Joseph and our Blessed Mother, we are told, gave the gift of 2 turtle doves as they came to offer sacrifice for the gift of their child in the temple. This is an image of the poor. This was a gift assigned to the poor. Joseph and Mary are the working poor all around us. And they have a special love and solidarity with the poor. You know, Jesus clearly in the Gospels has a special love for the poor. We don't like to hear the truth, but Jesus actually has favorites. He's got favorites. And the favorites are the poor, materially poor, spiritually poor. He has a special love for them. And because of that, we have to have a special love for them. And Jesus has that love, first of all, because God the Father loves the poor, which is a mystery, I fully admit. Funny way to show love, destitution. But he does have a special love for them, and they have a special place in heaven, those who persevere in faith, hope, and love. But I also wonder if perhaps part of the reason why Jesus had such a love for the poor, the materially poor, and indeed the spiritually poor, think of the tax collectors and the prostitutes, because Mary and Joseph did. He was formed in his sacred humanity, in habits of life that would have come to him from his family. And Mary and Joseph had a love for the poor. I'm very, very grateful to my parents for this lesson that they impressed upon us. And I think it's one of the reasons why 2 of my siblings belong to religious congregations that are explicitly dedicated to the poor, because my parents, God bless them, made it very clear that the gospel must be lived out in a special way in our relationship and our love for the poor. My dad, even today, will rib me. All of your highfalutin theology, what does it mean for the poor? What does your sermon mean for the poor? Yeah, good question, Dad. Good question. The poor, God has a special love. He has a special love for the poor. He who is so poor right here. So too in our own life, our relationship with the poor directly affects whether or not we will be saved. And we've said that many times before, and we'll say it over and over again. How we treat the poor, our love for them, is directly connected to salvation. Matthew 25, pretty clear. Whatever you did for the least of my brothers and sisters, you did for me. So, how does St. Joseph help us prepare for the Mass, this place of sacrificial love? He teaches us love for neighbor in his love for the Blessed Mother. We need to be asking ourselves, how does my action, my word, affect other people? Maybe I'm right, but do I need to tell people I'm right? How does this affect other people? What are the rights of others? And what is my obligation to them? We can become like little children. This is mine, as we hold on to our little Voltron model, This is mine. That's the words of a petty child. We're called to be sons and daughters of God. What is theirs? What is theirs? And what do I owe them? And the poor, a special love for the poor. My dear sisters, the missionaries of charity, have both at least one holy hour a day and time with the poor. It's a beautiful connection. Their capacity to see Jesus in the Eucharist is connected to their capacity to see Jesus in the poor, and vice versa. If we have no awareness of the poor in our life, no awareness of their struggles and sufferings, there's only so far we can go, because those are the people that Jesus hangs out with and that he loves.